Good evening, everyone. Good evening. So, when everyone signed in, everybody knows this is being recorded. We're going to wait a few minutes and wait for other people to get on. So,
Do we have to let them in or they come in automatically when they
they come in automatically when
okay.
you look on participants, when you click on,
Yeah.
thank you. When you click on participants, it'll tell you who's attended. So
Okay.
far,
It's just
nobody's in attendance yet.
it's all right.
That's why I said we'll give them a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I know December said that she's logging on in just a sec. I think she was gonna change real quick. But yeah. And I know a few people who are going to join but have another meeting, so they're gonna be watching the video afterwards when it's out.
Plus we'll put it on YouTube too, so within a day or two, so we'll have it permanently.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna edit your presentation out, so we have that. We're gonna try to get you some academic gigs.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Do, 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 do. So, we're waiting for another panelist to come
Yeah,
on.
December. She'll be here in a minute. She goes by
Okay.
she, it's her pronouns?
She, her,
Okay.
it, they, any,
We want to be
she,
politically
he,
correct.
it, they.
And you're always so forgiving when we screw up, but I know some people aren't.
Yeah.
So, but still, really want to get it right.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just
Out
more.
of curiosity and pure humor,
Uh-huh.
is she by any chance a unicorn? Can we call her a unicorn?
You is Coco with you.
The reason my avatar doesn't smoke.
Now
Yeah.
you
On
know
your
why I
avatar,
always
it's so
have mine
cute.
on. Because
I
I
feel
be
bad that I
smoking.
don't have one up, but also I feel like if I'm going to be presenting, I feel like I would rather be face up
Yeah.
front and not
But
an
this is
avatar.
cool too for people that don't want that want to be anonymous. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because they can change their name. They can be, you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So I wouldn't mind to look older though. She looks too young.
I get that. She has enough resemblance to you, but definitely
I love
knowing
how
Right?
if
Doesn't it
I
look
didn't know
like
you, I
Bella?
would assume that you were younger because of the avatar.
look how big LaRisse's eyes are. She's
Yeah.
get a nice smile too. Oh, who's that? It's somebody.
That's December.
Hello,
That let her in.
welcome.
Ew. Nah, she came in on her own.
Oh, okay, she's in.
Um,
Hey,
Hello.
nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We're gonna give
Yeah,
people a
just
few more
pleasure.
minutes before we get started.
Bet. Okay.
Ooh, I thought of another pronoun. Sort of. It's not really a pronoun, but
What's that, Zoey? You know you're dying to say
muscle.
it. Yeah, nice.
You guys are like, yeah, I don't want to. I had it on something else. Oh, PowerPoint.
Are we recording?
Okay. Can everyone, if you're not talking, mute your mics? We're about to start. Remembering the Loss, the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. December 17th, 2025, this very day, marks the 22nd anniversary of the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. A day of reflection, advocacy, and remembrance for sex workers around the world who have lost their lives to violence or face systemic injustice. Established in 2003 by Dr. Annie Sprinkle and the SWAP USA, this day was created to address the pervasive violence sex workers face and the societal stigma. My name is LaResse Harvey, and I am a board member of COYOTE, Rhode Island. COYOTE stands for Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. I am also the founder of Once Incarcerated Anonymous, and we partner with COYOTE, Rhode Island, and host a sister-to-sister resource group on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. You can go to the website and find out how to register. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the founder of COYOTE, Rhode Island, the moderator of tonight, and the best damn advocate I know doing sex workers advocacy in Rhode Island, Miss Bella. Yay! I should have had some clapping here. Bella, unmute yourself and talk.
Thank you, Larice. Me and Larice met during Free Her fellowship in 2022, and we've been like glue ever since and done some really good work. So anyway, we wanted to tell people that we have a book out, and it's fitting to announce it today because it's called A Tribute to December 17th, the COYOTE Project. And it's based on about 10 years of research that we did. Research led to the amicus brief, The Challenge on FOSTA. It's going to be archived at Pembroke at Brown University. And in this political climate, it's really important our stuff's archived. So, 100 years from now, people can find out the truth instead of what the government tells them. So, and we also have a new podcast on Substack, sex work policy on our Substack channel. So we're going to go ahead and do this podcast. COYOTE Champion Sex Worker Safety. Take it away, Larice. Thank you.
LaResse, you're muted.
Thank you for telling me because I started the podcast like, can they hear it? Technical difficulties. My bad. And we're going to start the podcast and the PowerPoint show.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing on a really serious but vital collection of sources.
Yes, very. We have research, historical archives, activist notes.
And they're all centered on memorializing the lost and really fighting for safety within a community that has historically faced just extreme and often invisible violence.
And indifference. That's a key word in these materials. They give a necessary, I would say, unvarnished look at the systemic forces that allow this violence to persist.
So our mission today is to unpack that. We'll get into the history of the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers, or IDTVSW.
Right, and we'll try to understand the complex scope of the threat and, highlight the immediate life-saving initiatives that are being developed by the community itself.
Okay, so let's jump right in with that. The IDTVSW, it's observed annually on December 17th.
That's right.
And it was established back in 2003 by Dr. Annie Sprinkle and an advocacy group called SWAP USA. That's the Sex Workers Outreach Project USA.
And that initial focus is just so crucial to understanding how this all started. It began as it was a necessary act of remembrance in Seattle, Washington.
Specifically for the victims of the Green River Killer.
Exactly. The materials make it crystal clear that the official response to those killings was agonizingly slow and really dismissive because the victims were sex workers. It was a very localized, painful demand for recognition.
So how did a vigil focused on the trauma of victims in Seattle, how does that spark a global movement for December 17th?
Well, that's the thing.
It suggests that what happened in Seattle wasn't some kind of anomaly. It was more like a mirror.
It was precisely that. It became apparent very quickly that the violence, the systemic indifference, the failure of law enforcement to prioritize these cases, these were global problems, not just a local failure.
So the vigil just evolved.
It did. It evolved into this annual international event. It's now a worldwide call to attention about hate crimes committed against sex workers everywhere and an urgent demand to address the root causes.
That transition from a local, necessary act of mourning to a global political movement, that leads us right into the core issue.
Why the violence persists.
Exactly. The argument being made in these sources is strong. This violence isn't just random malice, it's systemic. So what's the biggest driver they identify?
The core drivers are structural and legal. Activists in the material point directly to prohibitionist laws.
Meaning the criminalization of the work itself.
Right. That, alongside just profound social stigma and discrimination, the problem is when you make the work illegal, you automatically push it underground.
And that creates a massive vulnerability.
A huge one that predators, abusers, even state actors can exploit without any real fear of accountability.
So laws that are on the surface designed to control the industry, they end up functioning almost like a protection racket for abusers.
They do, because victims are often unable or just afraid to go to the police.
It makes reporting a crime against you potentially riskier than just enduring it.
Exactly. You've effectively legalized the abuse. And what's detailed here, and this is so important, is that this violence overwhelmingly targets those who are already facing multiple layers of oppression.
That's right. The discussion isn't just about the work. It's about the intersectional nature of who gets targeted. Tell us more about that.
Well, the materials detail that the violence disproportionately targets those who are already systemically marginalized. Yeah. We're talking about transgender people, people of color.
And the sources specifically note anti-Blackness.
They do. And also individuals who use drugs, undocumented people, disabled people, people experiencing homelessness, and poor women.
So you really can't separate the fight against violence against sex workers from the fight against racism,
and the criminalization
transphobia,
of poverty and drug use.
Yeah.
It's all connected. It's one system of vulnerability.
Tying into all of that is the intense cultural prejudice. There's a term that comes up in the material, ornophobia.
Yes. It refers to the specific fear, disgust, or, prejudice directed at sex work and sex workers. It's a core component of the violence because it allows society to refuse to even acknowledge or grieve the victims.
Right. If the social perception is that the victim wasn't a person, she was a prostitute, then that indifference is the fuel.
It is. It strips away their humanity, which makes their death, inconsequential to the wider world.
And that stripping away of humanity has some chilling historical parallels.
It does. And the sources use them to help us understand the deep roots of this stigma. A really powerful analogy appears in a poem.
Wild Woman's Sisterhood by Thea Forsstrom.
That's the one. And she argues it was not witches who burned, it was women.
That's a powerful line. What's the historical context they're drawing on for that comparison?
The comparison is profound. It links this historical scapegoating to modern violence. Historically, amid famine, religious wars, and widespread fear, certain women were targeted.
Women seen as sexually independent, poor, or just outside the norm.
Exactly. They were labeled dark and dangerous. And that label, that became the justification for the witch trials and all the horrific violence that followed.
So the mechanism of oppression is the same. You use stigma, fear, and legal fanaticism to turn a marginalized group into lethal scapegoats who can be harmed without consequence.
Precisely. The analogy emphasizes that the core threat isn't a specific crime. It's the systemic power to dehumanize someone, to categorize them as disposable.
And the poem concludes, knowing our history is important when we are building the new world.
Right. Understanding that history of weaponizing stigma, is just crucial to dismantling the indifference that we see today.
That's a gut-wrenching realization. And it brings us to the ultimate act of resistance against that indifference.
The master memorial lists.
Yes, let's move from the abstract discussion of stigma to the concrete reality of this loss, which is captured in that list.
We really have to shift the focus to honoring those lives. The memorial list is just staggering, name after name after name.
And they're read aloud not just to mourn.
No, it's also to energize the commitment to continue fighting for the safety and rights of sex workers. It's about turning grief into action, memory into a historical record.
And this wasn't just some spontaneous vigil. The impulse to remember, it led to the creation of the Master Memorial List by the organization COYOTE RI.
Call off your old tired ethics in Rhode Island.
Right, and they started this in 2020. So why was creating a permanent physical archive so important to them?
It ensures the memory and the data are preserved for future generations. It prevents this history of violence from being erased. This is a, quote, crucial historical archive.
And it's being permanently preserved.
Yes, at the COYOTE RI archives at the Pembroke Center at Brown University. And that move, it elevates these records from just advocacy notes to formal institutional history.
That archival work is so vital. The list isn't static, is it? The materials really emphasize that.
Not at all. Cases are solved and victims are identified decades later. It requires retroactive additions. Memory is often a race against time.
And the case of Eklutna Annie is a perfect, if painful, example of that.
It's a perfect example of why this has to be a living document. She was the last unidentified victim of the serial killer Robert Hansen up in Alaska. She was finally identified using genetic genealogy.
37 years after her death.
37 years. And she was then added to the master list. It just shows that even the long forgotten are eventually counted and remembered.
But the work of counting, it leads us to a heartbreaking truth, which is that we'll never truly know the total number of sex workers lost.
That's the painful reality that just comes through so clearly in these materials. Deaths often go uninvestigated, or victims are never even reported missing in the first place.
And sometimes families might choose not to disclose the nature of the person's work.
Right, because of that intense, lingering stigma we just talked about. In those cases, the person just disappears from the record entirely.
That feeling, that gut-wrenching grief and fear, it's really crystallized in the poem Who Will Weep for Us by Norma Jean Almodovar. It's included in the sources.
And that poem speaks directly to the consequences of this societal disregard. It asks, who will grieve for us, the Magdalens, when our life comes to an end?
Our murdered bodies oft left unclaimed without a single friend.
It powerfully asserts we're stripped of our humanity, highlighting that ultimate tragedy of being discarded both in life and in death. This is why the master list exists, to actively fight against that stripping away of humanity.
That need for recognition and protection, it shifts our focus to the practical life-saving measures developed by the community itself.
Yes, in the face of this pervasive danger.
With, an absence of adequate external protection, the COYOTE RI community has prioritized peer support systems.
And these are practical, immediate, life-saving measures born from absolute necessity. They rely entirely on trust and mutual support, not on waiting for external enforcement agencies.
Which, as the sources note, often contribute to the problem.
Right. So what do these specific safety systems look like? The materials detail two main ones.
The check-in culture, pioneered by Bella in 2024, and the proof-of-life text messaging system. How does a check-in culture actually work?
The check-in culture is all about real-time accountability, communication. When someone takes a new client or enters a new situation, they check in with a trusted peer.
With location details and agreed-upon time for a follow-up.
Exactly. And this is mandatory. It's immediate. If that follow-up time passes, protocols are triggered.
Okay, and the proof-of-life system?
That's sort of an evolution of that accountability system. It was created by COYOTE RI Healing Hustlers support group. It's usually a specific agreed-upon code word or a text message.
That needs to be sent at specific intervals or on request.
Yes. And if the code is wrong, or if the text is missed entirely, immediate prearranged intervention protocols are triggered, whether that's calling a designated contact or going to the location.
I mean, these systems are just pure ingenuity born from knowing the risks better than anyone else.
They have to be.
But the sources bring up a really serious problem with the institutional response to this whole issue. Billions of dollars allocated to creating awareness about trafficking.
But activists argue this funding is actually misdirected.
How can raising awareness be harmful? That seems counterintuitive.
It is, but it's a crucial critique. The argument is that these massive funding streams are focused on awareness campaigns that shift the focus from safety and rights to a narrative of rescue.
And these campaigns often emphasize sensationalized trafficking stories,
which are absolutely real and horrifying. But in doing so, they often rely on stigmatizing generalized language that harms all sex workers, whether they are working voluntarily or are being trafficked.
So instead of funding systemic solutions or focusing on changing prohibitionist laws, the money reinforces the very stigma that makes sex workers vulnerable to begin with.
Exactly. And this critique is backed up by a huge structural failure. The materials highlight that virtually none of this massive funding has been tracking how many sex workers have gone missing.
None of it.
It's a deliberate structural blind spot in how resources are allocated.
And the threats aren't just from, serial offenders or exploitative clients. The threat matrix is also political.
That is a deeply worrying concern mentioned in the sources. They note that visible law enforcement operations, and they cite examples like masked ICE agents, contribute to a climate of fear.
And vulnerability.
Yes, where community members are detained, kidnapped, and, quote, often never heard from again. This just reinforces the necessity of peer-led safety protocols.
Because the official agencies are sometimes seen as part of the danger, not the solution.
Exactly. So Coyote Rai and similar groups, they champion these practical life-saving measures to check in the proof of life systems over abstract awareness campaigns that consistently fail to address the root causes of violence.
It's about tangible safety outcomes, not just visibility that often comes with a judgmental lens.
Precisely. They're building a protective infrastructure for their members because they understand that the intersecting stigmas, the hornophobia, racism, transphobia, and the criminal legal framework are primary threats, and they have to be countered by organization and mutual aid.
We've covered such a wide and critical range of topics in this deep dive, from the necessary origins of ID TVSW on December 17th
to the fight against those intersecting stigmas.
The vital work of the Master Memorial List, holding memory against the pressure of erasure, and the ingenuity of these community-led safety measures.
And that leads us right back to the core challenge. If knowledge is a form of power, what does it mean for a society to spend billions on awareness of an issue while simultaneously refusing to fund the tracking of missing people within that community?
Because if the bodies aren't tracked and the families are too afraid to come forward because of stigma, the true scale of the violence can never be quantified.
Correct. By not tracking them, society guarantees that key historical evidence of violence remains uninvestigated and disregarded. It echoes the very same repression and dismissal of human life that we saw throughout the history the sources describe.
It's the same pattern.
It is. And that choice to fund abstract awareness over concrete evidence and safety, that is the provocative thought that builds on the material you are now well informed on. And it's something worth exploring further.
And there you have it, folks. Now, Bella, can you please explain what this podcast is about and who did it? You're on mute.
Yeah. So I used Notebook LM. And if you put the information you want, I put the 2022 memorial, because we went back to 1986 in it. There was like hundreds and hundreds of people in it. And I just did a little statistics and a little chart of how the violence has increased. And that's the only information I gave them. It did talk about proof of life and stuff. And it created that. It created the narrative around it. So you can control what information it uses. So it doesn't use, the stigmatizing stuff and the fake news and, that kind of stuff. So, and then it also will transcribe it too. So you can transcribe it. So that's what we've been putting on our sex work policy podcast on Substack. And, I always say that this creating awareness, we don't create awareness about anything else, right? I think creating awareness is the same thing as promoting stigma and violence against sex workers. And I think there's different people. There's the people that know they're doing the harm, like Donna Hughes and Melissa Farley and, those ones. And then there's people like maybe college students or something that want to help and they just don't know better. They listen to them and they think this is the right thing to do. And those are the ones we can educate. And I'll tell you how you can find it. You can see who's a new activist. They're online and they're still fighting with the anti-trafficking people. Okay. And they will, it's like the pro-lifers. No matter how much evidence you have, they will suck your soul. You can't educate them. They're just kind of crazy. So, that's why my favorite feature on any social media is block and not wasting your time and energy. But thank you. You want to go ahead and introduce Yash for your
Yes, I'm
presentation?
going right into that.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So we have a wonderful presentation tonight. Whatever you wanted to know, you are about to find out with our lovely keynote speaker. He's a beautiful person, and I will read the short bio I have. Yash Rivera is a transsexual worker and sex trafficking survivor. He identifies as non-binary with a preference for masculine terms and a feminine gender expression. Yash has been involved in various types of sex work, including adult content creation, escorting, and porn performing. He is an advocate for both sex workers and LGBTQIA plus rights. And Yash, I will be queuing up the PowerPoint. And don't forget to put yourself off of mute.
Okay. Can you hear me? Do you
Yes.
want me to share my screen or do you have my PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah, you can share your screen.
Okay.
Hold on, let me make sure you can share your screen because that would be the best.
Sounds good. I just like being able to click my slides when I need to.
See if you can share your screen.
All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay, so I want to kind of preface this that this presentation was initially written for a trans healthcare conference. So it was written with an audience in mind who is already pretty familiar with trans issues, trans rights, trans identity, as well as people who were healthcare providers, therapists, doctors, nurses, anyone working in healthcare adjacent fields, social workers. And so I recognize that not everyone in this audience might initially connect with it, but whether you're a sex worker, this might give you some language to better describe some of your own experiences in healthcare. Whether you're a civilian who doesn't work in healthcare, you might be able to apply some of this to your own understanding of sex work, understanding of trans issues, as well as just getting to maybe see how this applies to other fields that you work in. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is my presentation on how we can support trans sex workers and trans sex trafficking survivors in healthcare settings. My name is Yash Rivera. I use it, its, he, him, and fey, fair, fairs pronouns. But yeah, and I guess one thing that I like to kind of ask everyone to kind of think about before we dive into this is just what kinds of biases are you coming into this room with? I want you to just take a moment to reflect on what assumptions you have about me before I dive into the next slide, knowing that I'm a sex worker, knowing that I'm trans, knowing that I'm also a former trafficking survivor, just kind of what assumptions come up for you and just kind of paying attention to that because that's really important throughout this presentation is that we're learning about our own biases, we're becoming aware of our own preconceived notions of trans people and of sex workers and of what sex work and sex trafficking means to us. So because we're talking about trans sex workers and this intersection of being involved in the sex industry, whether that's consensually or whether someone's being trafficked, combined with someone's trans experience. And so I kind of want to start a little bit by sharing a little bit more about my intersecting identities because I'm coming in here with different experiences than other trans sex workers, and they also have their own vast experiences. I can't speak for the experience of every trans sex worker out there, but I did bring my lived experience into this presentation, and I also brought in some interviews with different people, as well as some of COYOTE's existing research with sex workers in healthcare settings. So this here is an identity wheel, and just some other things about me is I also live with multiple disabilities. I'm neurodivergent. I'm 22. I'm about as old as December 17th has been celebrated. I'm queer. I'm Aero Ace. I do have some privileges. I'm a white US citizen, and then I have a multicultural background as a third culture kid that also adds its own level of oppression into things. And then I'm trans, I'm non binary. just some other things too. I have a college degree. I got my bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies. And a big aspect of my degree, I focused on learning about sex workers, learning about the feminist movement, learning about how sex workers' rights comes into politics, as well as understanding sexuality, relationships, communication. There was a lot of things that relate to what I'm talking about in this presentation that I really got to dive deep into with that. And then just so many other things about me, different aspects of my identity that are maybe more or less visible. But just kind of thinking about that, thinking about what surprised you, what maybe fit your stereotypes or your assumptions about me coming in. But yeah, so you'll get to learn probably a little bit more about my background being trans and being a sex worker when we get to the panel portion. But I have had some sense of knowing I was queer my whole life. I started to realize I was trans when I was 13, which was also when I was first introduced to the world of sex work. I knew some other queer youth who were engaged in sex work, whether for survival reasons or just knowing people in it. And so that was something that for me, because that was happening at the same time, played a really big role in my life. And then I also definitely I have some experiences of sex trafficking that I don't really want to dive deep into, but also having gotten into this work as a minor under the federal definition, I also fit under that umbrella because of that. So yeah, just again, kind of reflecting what about me surprised you, what didn't surprise you. I'm not going to speak too much about my own personal experience for most of the presentation, just because I'll share more of that in the panel. But if you have any questions, just kind of think of those for when we get to the panel portion. So something that I've heard come up a lot when we talk about sex work as an identity is just this question of, is sex work really that central to someone's identity? Because technically I could hide that I'm a sex worker. It could never come up. Many people who are involved in sex work, no one in their personal life necessarily knows. Most people, well, everyone knows a sex worker, whether or not you're aware of it, because of things like this. Not everyone chooses to be open, and the same goes for queer people in general. You can be queer and you can choose to stay in the closet, but for many people, they've realized that those are still central things to their identities. So with sex work, like other jobs, we're asked on a pretty frequent basis, like, what do you do for work? That's kind of a common conversation topic. And so even if someone maybe isn't super out about their identity, if they're navigating conversations with people on a regular basis, like I know some sex workers that have had to just make up a job on the spot, or maybe they have another side job that they tell people is their primary job. It is something that comes up a lot because what people do for their profession is a huge aspect of their identities. I want you to reflect, whether you're a sex worker or whether you're not involved in sex work, just how often are you asked about what you do for work? And then think about what it would be like if you couldn't talk to anyone about what you did for work. I think a lot, like when people are closeted, whether they can't talk about being trans or they can't talk about sex work, it's not even always just that they can't talk about that specific thing, but they can't talk about many different aspects of their life. For example, queer people often have to navigate things like hiding different behaviors and mannerisms and interests that are as queer. Maybe they are watching a show that has a queer character, someone about that, make that person be able to perceive them as queer when they're trying to stay in the closet. Maybe they have to be more careful about telling people what they study. For me, there are so many things in my life that intersect with my trans identity and with sex work that it becomes really difficult, if not impossible, to be able to talk to people without these things coming up. So before we get too deep into this, I am going to highlight some different definitions. First of all, sex work. Sex work is the exchange of sexual services for money or for other compensation. A sex worker is someone who works in the sex industry consensually. And then sex trafficking, the federal definition is force, fraud, coercion to compel someone to engage in commercial sex acts or if a minor is involved. And that's the federal definition. Every state has their own unique definition of what sex trafficking is. And then sex work and sex worker. Not everyone engaged in sex work necessarily identifies as a sex worker or would refer to their work as sex work, but this is how we're going to define it for this presentation, just to kind of make it clear, because any work that would fit into this label will be impacted by a lot of the same things that we're going to be talking about and a lot of that same stigma. So what is sex work? So sex work can look like a lot of different things. Someone can do various types of online sex work, such as sex phone operators, porn performers, cam performers, people that are selling used things like selling the container stuff of their vacuum, or use socks, or just a variety of things that is still a fully online type of work. And then adult content creators. So I myself, I've run some fan sites, I've done different types of virtual sex work, I've worked in porn. I've also done various types of in-person sex work. So in-person sex work includes street-based sex workers, it includes brothel workers, it includes escorts, BDSM workers, sugar babies, strippers, burlesque performers, Asian spa workers. Again, not all of these necessarily identify with the label of sex work. There are people in each of these industries who do identify as sex workers and those who don't. And also different types of these work, you might notice some of these are completely legal in different parts of the US. Some of these are not legal at all. There are so many different laws that impact different types of sex work, but a lot of the same stigma and things tend to come into play. And then there's other types of touch work that can also involve sex that is legal, such as surrogate partners, surrogate partner therapy, professional cuddlers, other somatic sex/touch professionals, where the lines between what is sex work and what is not sex work gets really blurry in these professions. So they often are also impacted by a lot of the same stigma and legislation and things. So why do sex work? So sex workers are incredibly varied in their backgrounds, experiences, and needs. So there's lots of different reasons why someone might do this. Job discrimination, so especially for trans sex workers, they might deal with job discrimination on the basis of being trans. They might deal with it on the basis of maybe they've been formerly incarcerated because of sex work. Maybe they're dealing with another marginalized identity that's impacted them to have job discrimination where they have to turn to sex work. They might need flexible hours due to a disability. So I know for me, I live with multiple disabilities. Sex work gives me a lot of flexibility to be able to work when I want and work from home and be able to have a little more control over my schedule and be able to work depending on where my physical needs are at. Maybe they want some extra time with family. So I know some sex workers who have kind of worked a certain schedule so that they have more time to be at home with their kids or with other loved ones. For some people, it's good financial stability. It's really difficult, especially in our current economy, to live off of income from one job for a lot of people. And so some sex workers might already have other jobs. It might have already been like working full time, and sex work just helps get them more financial stability to be able to get on top of their income. Some people enjoy the work. I definitely enjoy what I do. And then there's also people who do survival sex work, which I've also been involved in as well. There's been different points in my life where I've had to engage in sex work for food, for a place to stay, for a ride home from the airport, for many different reasons. And also there are plenty of other times I've done it just because I want to and I enjoy it and I enjoy the interactions that I have. And so different people do it for different reasons. Overall, kind of this last point though is everyone works for money. So the same reasons you might choose to work your job are the same reasons a sex worker chooses to engage with their job. Also, lots of people engage in sex work to help cover really short-term big costs, like paying for their transition, paying for tuition. I know some people who they maybe have a full-time job and then they do sex work just to pay for these things because they just don't make enough to cover things like transition costs. For some people, it supplements their other income, and other people might have already been doing the work for free. So I also have met many sex workers who were really into hookup culture, were really involved in these spaces where they do work similar to what they do in sex work, just now there is the added element of they get compensated for it as well. And then there's also cases of people doing sex work as a one-time thing. Maybe they were in a desperate situation and someone offered them money, or maybe they just happened to be offered at one point and decided to give it a try, and it was just a one-time thing. Again, everyone works for money. So at the end of the day, doing sex work is a job, and people pick jobs for lots of different reasons, and many of those reasons can also apply to sex work. So there's really limited research on trans sex workers. A lot of the research on sex workers tends to focus on cisgender heterosexual white women, and it especially focuses on street-based sex workers, which only then gives us a view of one specific demographic of sex work. It was really hard to find a specific statistic on what the demographics of trans sex workers looks like, but the only consistent thing that we could find was that it says that it's estimated that 11% of trans women and 1% of cis women engaged in sex work. And this, of course, only focuses still on women. So there's a lot of lack of research on cisgender men, trans men, non-binary people, intersex people, and two-spirit sex workers, just because we don't have a lot of representation for them in the research, even though there are still so many of them out there and so many resources being put out by sex workers who don't identify as women as well. But unfortunately, this is kind of where the research focuses, especially research that's coming from anti-trafficking organizations that tend to kind of highlight this model victim who is generally a cishet young white woman with a little more privilege than some other sex workers. So a little bit about how this is relevant to healthcare providers specifically is sex workers deal with a lot of barriers to access. They can struggle to access healthcare due to criminalization, stigma, occupational hazards, financial institutions. Not having proof of income makes it difficult to access public services like Medicaid, SNAP. I know for myself, I've struggled to access housing due to the lack of proof of income that can come with sex work. But there's still so many different barriers that we face. And then providers, so healthcare providers are in a really unique position to be able to give support to sex workers and to trans people. So that's kind of who this is focused on. But again, if you're not a healthcare provider, there's still many things you could take out of this. So criminalization is the legal persecution for being involved in sex work. Criminalization is a political process whereby people who do not fit a dominant societal norm are labeled criminals, and their circumstances and behavior are labeled as crime. And that's from Women's Lives Multicultural Perspectives. Wrong direction. So how does this impact specifically victims of sex trafficking? So a lot of the times we have this legislation that comes out that is often painted as in favor of trafficking survivors, then instead actually hinders them. It negatively impacts them in just the same ways that it harms sex workers, because of just the ways that trafficking and consensual sex work are conflicted or like confused as the same. And so it's really hard for people to identify when someone's actually being trafficked and when they're working consensually, because of the ways that sex work is portrayed as exploitative. And so when criminalization comes into play, trafficking victims can't report exploitation without being arrested themselves. And oftentimes sex workers are the best people to be able to identify and protect trafficking survivors, but they also can't report that exploitation when they become aware of it without fear of arrest themselves. And then as for how it impacts consensual sex workers can't report other types of crimes, such as like being robbed or dealing with sexual assault, or if they know a sex worker who's murdered, without being arrested themselves for prostitution. Because of criminalization and sex work not being recognized as work, sex workers don't have access to the same kinds of worker protections that other workers have. And also, clients can utilize that criminalization to assert control over sex workers. So whether it's in like a Nordic model where they're criminalized, or whether sex work is completely criminalized, clients can kind of use some of that dynamic to actually give themselves more power and like push sex workers' boundaries, threaten to arrest them. I'm not going to get into specific details of what that can look like, but yeah. And then there's also just this ongoing fear of being arrested, fear of being evicted, being debanked, which is when a sex worker is completely cut off from their bank account when their bank finds out that they're a sex worker, being denied health care, a fear of being deported, losing child custody, dealing with job discrimination because of sex work. So there's lots of different ways that criminalization impacts consensual sex workers, both when they're actively doing sex work and later on in life as well. So this image here is kind of to show the ways that public policy impacts these different realms of our lives. So when there is an anti-trans bill that's passed, we'll say, not only does that impact, not only is that public policy, but it impacts communities, it impacts people's interpersonal relationships. If someone is maybe not out as trans, or they've been out for a bit, and then other people in their lives are exposed to anti-trans legislation, that oftentimes that legislation paints trans people as perverts, as rapists, as mentally ill, as all of these horrible things. Those impact those people's perceptions of trans people, and that impacts their relationships with the trans people that they encounter because of the ways that that informs their views. Kind of similar to how policies around sex work inform our views of sex workers, especially if you haven't had any contact with a sex worker that you've recognized. A lot of times that public policy around it is what individuals are exposed to. And not only does it impact the people that sex workers and trans people are interacting with, but it impacts their relationships with themselves too. I know for myself, being really engaged with all that anti-trafficking narrative, all of the harmful things I was hearing about sex work and sex workers while I was actively engaged with it, definitely led to me having a lot of internalized whorephobia. It impacted how I viewed myself, and impacted how I interacted with other sex workers. And same thing too for me with encountering anti-trans legislation when I was still figuring out my identity. So criminalization isolates sex workers from support from their family, from their friends, and from healthcare. Public policy on both trans and sex worker rights impacts them on an interpersonal, it comes into their relationship with themselves, and on an interpersonal level, their relationships with others. And people need community support. That's something that they need. So this can have a really huge impact on individuals. And also, I've seen, as a result, a lot of really tight-knit communities built up of sex workers, built up of trans people in response to this, that oftentimes maybe don't have support outside of that space. So a lot of the times when we're talking about what sex workers want in terms of what kinds of legalization or criminalization kind of model, we really want decriminalization. Why do we want decriminalization? Decriminalization improves sex workers' access to law enforcement, access to negotiate with clients, and increased ability to obtain the resources that they need. There's a key difference between decriminalization and legalization. Under a legalization model, certain types of sex work are legal and they're regulated by the government, which is oftentimes just backdoor criminalization. Anyone that can't meet the legal standards for sex work is then still criminalized, which often tends to be the most marginalized people in this community, especially trans people and people of color. So I have this quote here that I stole from COYOTE's original healthcare modules, but could not find where it comes from. But the majority of violence against sex workers is not just violence against sex workers. It's violence against trans women, against women of color, against drug users, against immigrants. We cannot end marginalization and victimization of all sex workers without also fighting transphobia, racism, stigma, and criminalization of drug use and xenophobia. So this is kind of going back to that bit about intersectionality. When we're talking about sex workers' rights and we're talking about trans rights, we can't just focus on those groups individually. We have to consider all the other intersectional identities around it. We have to fight for all humans' rights, and we can't just necessarily target specific ones and check the boxes. And so, especially since we're talking about trans sex workers right now, when we talk about sex workers' rights, we can't exclude trans people because trans people make up a huge proportion of people involved in sex work. I know from some of COYOTE's research, we found that more than 50% of sex workers are queer. So even if not all of those are trans, a large portion of those in the sex worker community are queer and impacted by queer issues as well. And then when we're talking about queer issues, we can't exclude sex workers because sex workers are so heavily involved in that community as well. Okay, so sex workers face disproportionately high rates of violence. The most vulnerable for experiencing violence are street-based sex workers, trans women of color, migrant sex workers living with disabilities, mental health problems, or substance abuse problems, and survival sex workers. One big common misconception about sex workers that I know I grew up being exposed to is that sex workers, as a result, develop substance abuse problems, they become mentally ill, they develop trauma, but those things aren't actually inherent to sex work. And in fact, many sex workers might already arrive at their work having faced those challenges before showing up to work. So it's not always necessarily people are developing these things because of sex work. It can be people are experiencing these things that it takes away some of their options and can lead to them maybe sex work is what's only available to them, or that is what they choose for some other reason. And oftentimes those challenges can be exacerbated by stigma and criminalization. So there's a few different types of stigma that commonly come up with sex workers. There's one, this idea of like good woman, bad woman, and that sex workers are just bad women who get what they deserve. There's also this big idea that sex workers spread STIs, which we'll be getting into in a bit. And also the belief that sex workers are uneducated. Kind of for this last one, like I'm a sex worker here, I have a bachelor's degree, I've presented this before at conferences, like not all sex workers are uneducated, though there is still going to be a vast variety of education levels within the sex industry, just like there is in other types of work and other types of communities. So when we talk about this idea of sex workers being just bad women who get what they deserve, what we often don't talk about are things like how hard it is to get housing, about job discrimination, about how difficult it is to live on things like minimum wage. We don't really think about the circumstances that lead people to engage in sex work, whether that's something that they are choosing to do because they enjoy it and they want to, or if they're facing other kinds of things that make it so that sex work is just the most viable work option for them. Sex workers deal with different kinds of occupational hazards. So the occupational hazards they might run into are things like, especially for in-person sex work, like condom breakage, risking the transfer of STIs, physical injury due to a violent crime. And then with that, so this kind of idea that sex workers spread STIs is a little bit misdirected. So sex workers are actually much more aware of how to keep themselves and their sexual partner safe than the general public. So right here I have this 2017 survey done of 1,500 sex workers in the US on condom usage, compared with a 2017 study by the CDC on condom use among just the general population. And we found that while working, 9% of sex workers reported that they never used condoms, 13% reported that they rarely or sometimes do, and 78% reported that they most often or always did. And then while they weren't working, so like in their personal life, 20% reported never using condoms, 37% reported rarely or sometimes using them, and 42% reported most often or always using them. And then we look at the statistics with just kind of the general population. Fortunately, the survey mostly focused on cisgender men and women, and our data just kind of covered sex workers in general, so we can't really break this down based off of trans and cis experiences. But in that survey, they found that 47% of cisgender men reported never using condoms, 34% reported rarely or sometimes using them, and 14% most often or always. And then cisgender women reported 60% reported never using them, 25% rarely or sometimes using them, and then 15% most often or always using them. So compared to the general public, sex workers tend to use condoms a lot more frequently. They tend to use different types of safer sex personal protective equipment, and are generally actually a lot more educated about their sexual health, other people's sexual health, how to protect themselves. And so this kind of misconception that sex workers are spreading STIs doesn't actually really consider the kinds of sexuality education that sex workers generally do have. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about experiences as a trans person and as a sex worker in healthcare settings. I'm going to share a little bit about my experience, and then I'm going to talk about some of the different case studies we have. So I'm going to start with my trans experience. The first time I disclosed my experience being trans to like my primary doctor, I'd been seeing this doctor for almost 4 years at this point, and I had known I was trans the entire time. I remember the doctor's office had like a form to fill out where I could update my name and whatnot, and like I would put my preferred name and pronouns on it every single time, and I remember it just didn't seem to always make it to my healthcare provider, and so instead I would kind of sit through my session and get dead named and misgendered. And it wasn't until that third year where I was seeing this provider, I had to see a different doctor because I needed some care last minute and my usual doctor wasn't available. And this doctor had like a student assistant with them who needed some time like practicing. And so they had them ask me some background questions while the other provider wasn't in the room. And they just happened to ask me my pronouns as part of that. And I was like, yeah, no, these are the pronouns that I use. And then they asked me about, like, we got my pronouns updated, we got my name updated, we got everything updated. But unfortunately, the system that they had set up just didn't always make it the easiest process to be able to come out to my provider. The most positive experience coming out as trans with Planned Parenthood, because just their forms were really out straightforward and had all the information on there. They even asked me a question like, have you ever engaged in commercial sex? So kind of digging into this. And so I really could just kind of fill that out. And I remember seeing that my provider actively looked over the sheet as they talked to me. They were really trans friendly. A lot of the staff there were openly queer themselves, and it made it really a safe space. And then my therapist had like a queer ally tag on her profile. I very much saw that and was out on our first session. I picked this therapist because she also had a sex worker ally tagged on her profile, and I didn't see another therapist in my area who had that. And so to me, it was really important to see a provider that would be okay with me doing sex work, even though it didn't come up in our meetings for over a year of seeing her, because it wasn't something that was really central to the things I was seeing a therapist for. But I wanted to know that if it did ever come up, that she was going to be a safe space to talk to about it. And then a lot of people in my life I'm out to as trans. Most of the people in my life are queer themselves, or are people that I just deal with on a regular basis, so I've just had to come out. Versus with my sex worker status, only so many people in my personal life know. People that are really close to me know. Some of my family knows. I'm very open about it in other workspaces, but it gets more tricky, especially when I deal with more impersonal relationships with healthcare providers that I don't see on a regular basis. So my therapist knows that I'm a sex worker. Planned Parenthood, I checked the box, but it never was really something vital to my session, so it was never something I felt the need to verbally disclose and have a conversation with a provider about. And they also didn't ever bring it up. But with my primary doctor, there were many different times that I wanted to disclose and thought it would be helpful, but often just didn't feel safe doing so. So I mostly have had positive experiences with my therapist disclosing being trans, talking about sex worker issues, but I do unfortunately feel like there were some different times when interacting with her where her training just didn't seem to really fit what I needed as someone who was going through sex work. And sorry, my brain is a little today. But she had some different times where she maybe kind of was pushing more towards to exit the work when I was really engaged with it and really wanted to do the work, or where I could see some of her own biases and things showing up that made it sometimes difficult to talk about my work, even though she was generally pretty allied. The most positive experience I've had was actually with the sexual assault advocate. I showed up to like my first session meeting with this advocate, and I had on a shirt that I'd embroidered that just said sex work is work. And I remember she made a point in our very first interaction to comment and tell me that she liked my shirt. And to me, that was a safe way that she could indicate to me that she was sex worker friendly, that she supported sex workers' rights. And I didn't end up coming out about that until much later. It was often easier to present myself as, oh, I'm just an ally. But she definitely helped create that space. So we're going to be talking a little bit about later on in this presentation, things not to do when you're trying to support sex workers, when you're trying to support trafficking survivors, as well as things that can help create more positive experiences for people with disclosing. So now I'm going to dig into some case studies. So these first two case studies are sex workers who are not trans. They're from COYOTE's original healthcare modules. And I thought it was important to include them just because of how well they highlight sex workers' experiences in healthcare. And also, like, I think one thing that's interesting about being trans is not everyone engaged in sex work who is trans might always be out or feel comfortable being out about that as well, even if they disclose they're a sex worker, or they might not even always realize that they're trans. So kind of with any of these cases, especially with queer identities, it's not something you can just read into people. So I feel like these situations still work well. So first I'm going to share Paulo's case. So Paulo Costas, a 25-year-old man, queer, person of color, and is marginally housed. Before presenting to healthcare services, Paulo is drugged and raped. When he became symptomatic, such as night sweats, weight loss, and frequent sickness, it resulted in him losing his job of 5 years and not being able to maintain a new one. He was not ready to get tested because he would have to accept that he got raped, something that he felt was not supposed to happen to him. When he was getting closer to using all his savings, Costas was given the opportunity by a close friend to do exotic dancing under the table. That night, he made a lot of money and was offered to do escorting for a rate that would have him pay his rent by that night. He continued sex work because it allowed him to maintain his lifestyle, and he kept with his health by eating healthy and going to the gym. It was not until he got sick in a session with a client that he passed out, and his client, out of fear, took him to his hospital and outed that Costas was a sex worker. Costas woke up to an HIV specialist who disclosed that Costas was HIV positive, and because of his unpredictable lifestyle, she or any other physician would not provide treatment unless he quit sex work. Mr. Costas left the hospital with no treatment, and he could not quit sex work because it was his main source of income. Mr. Costas felt it was important to disclose his status now that he knew it, even though prior he would always wear a condom. It was not until one client used that against him and forced him to have multiple sessions with him for free, or he would report him to the police for intentionally posing the client. Mr. Costas was afraid and did what the client wanted until one day he was done and did not care if the client and him got locked up, and informed the client that he had recorded their conversations, and if he were to get reported to the police, that he would also report the client for soliciting sex and forcing him to have sex with him. A year after his HIV diagnosis, he was admitted into palliative care due to his frequent hospital visits and acquiring an AIDS diagnosis due to his CD4 falling below 200. Not only was Mr. Costas' right to human dignity was taken away when he got tested without his consent, he was made to believe that there was no physician that would care for him. So this second case is for Maria. So Maria is a 32-year-old cisgender woman that presents to the emergency department after being assaulted. Maria is looking to have her wounds cleaned and structured and have x-ray images taken, and during her intake interview mentions that she is a sex worker. After disclosing that she does sex work, no other questions are asked of her, and she is treated with open hostility while her injuries are being treated. Maria asks if she can also receive an STI test, but is not given a response. Her healthcare provider leaves the room for a long period of time without an explanation and returns with the police officer. The provider says that Maria is a sex trafficking victim and that she needs to file a report against her trafficker that assaulted her. This is not what happened to Maria. She was assaulted outside of work and was not being trafficked. She was a consensual adult sex worker. Maria excused herself to go to the bathroom and left so that she did not have to file the report. She did not receive the x-rays or STI tests she was looking to get done and avoided healthcare facilities in the future. Throughout this scenario, providers made assumptions about Maria. They simultaneously judged her for doing sex work while pitying her for being an assumed victim of trafficking. Not only did Maria not receive effective care, she was also forced to disclose her involvement in the sex industry to police and was scared to return to any healthcare facility in the future. So these next two are two of our people that are actually on our panel tonight that let me interview them for part of this presentation. So first I'm going to go ahead and start with Zoey. I asked them both questions about their experiences, both being trans and being sex workers in healthcare settings. So during her interview, Zoey said that when she first came out as trans to healthcare providers, it was difficult. The doctors didn't really care all that much. But something that she ran into was navigating pancreatitis. When this showed up, her doctors immediately assumed it was her hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, and now she has stopped HRT for 8 years because of this and still has pancreatitis. When asked if she'd ever been outed as trans, she said sort of. While she was touring an assisted living facility, one of the staff members added her as trans to the group and took that choice away from her. It was something that should have been kept private, that she should have been able to choose to disclose herself if she wanted to. And another place that she was touring said that they liked her, but they couldn't accept her because it was a male-female living situation. When asked about disclosing sex work, she said that she disclosed at a new place that she was a retired sex worker, and they told her that they have a group for that, and then never said anything else. Most of the doctors have been aware that she's been involved in sex work. Now getting into December's interview. So when disclosing that she was trans to a healthcare provider, she said that she was flat out ignored. They said, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense, Mr. Dead Name. But otherwise, she had a really positive experience as well, disclosing to Planned Parenthood, pretty similar to what I shared a bit earlier. When disclosing sex work, she said that this first time in another situation, she said yes, she disclosed, and they were really judgmental. They kept talking about the dangers, the risks, to really understand what you're getting into, and she had to just start talking what her prices were to get them to just shut up and stop talking to her about it. Versus when she had disclosed being involved in sex work at Planned Parenthood, they instead worked with her on that, and they helped get her on PrEP and kind of discussed it more. And then when asked if there was a time when she wanted to disclose but chose not to, she said yes, there were some times where she wanted to get tested, but she was scared to disclose that she was involved in sex work and therefore didn't get tested as a result. And I can definitely relate with that. For a lot of sex workers, there's often this, like, sometimes to get your care, you kind of have to jump around these hoops and questions about why you need it without disclosing that you're a sex worker. And I often, especially trying to get STI testing as regularly as I wanted, I remember having doctors telling me things like I only needed it like once a year when I do sex work for a living and I want to keep myself and my partners and my clients safe. And for some different sex workers, I've heard different stories about how they can deal with different judgment and things from professionals, but often they might deal with more of that if they chose to disclose. Okay. So when surveyed about disclosing their sex worker status to providers, this is that same survey of 1,500 sex workers in the US in 2017. 42% said that yes, they had disclosed to a healthcare provider, and 58% no, they hadn't. 45% thought that disclosing their sex worker status would improve healthcare. 25% said it would not, and 30% said that it would depend on the provider. And depends said that they would like to disclose, but only if they knew that the provider wouldn't judge them or report them. So now we're going to get a little bit into how we can create safer spaces for sex workers. So being an ally to trans sex workers, when we are engaging in allyship, we need to be centering the voices of the community. So centering trans voices, centering sex work voices. You can get as educated as you want, but oftentimes it's better to center the voices and the things that people in these communities are sharing. But of course, there are situations where, like, if you are the only person in a group and you're not trans and you're not a sex worker, but you have enough education to know that something someone's saying is misinformation, or kind of need a little more perspective in the conversation, like still speaking up. But we do want to be centering the voices of the people talking about these issues, especially in sex work, because so often sex workers are portrayed as victims who are uneducated and who don't realize that they're being exploited, and often finding different ways to make those voices less valuable and say that sex workers don't know what they're talking about, when really we should be centering those voices. Being an ally, we want to be promoting the end of discriminatory practices that lead to social exclusion. We want to be promoting the end of criminalization of sex work that leads to incarceration and social exclusion, as well as transphobic rhetoric, violence against trans people and sex workers. We want to be promoting access to quality education, housing, and healthcare for trans sex workers, promoting harm reduction practices and peer engagement, and doing things like hiring sex workers maybe to help provide support to patients, because they're the people that are most informed in that. Maybe sex worker patients are going to feel safer talking to a sex worker peer in that setting than they are to a professional, regardless of how informed that professional is. So there are a few different actions that you can take right now. The first one is just to reflect on your bias. Secondly, doing some self-educating, and then lastly, creating safe spaces. So reflecting on our bias. So just kind of take a moment to pause. How might your personal beliefs and values on sex work impact how you treat patients before discussing sex work and clinical interactions? And if you're not a healthcare provider, how might that bias come up if you were to interact with a sex worker? And then think about, do you have bias that might come up when working with trans patients? It is possible that you maybe have done a lot of work on self-educating around trans issues, around sex worker issues, and not vice versa. And so just kind of being aware of where your bias is showing up, where you maybe need to do a little more educating. And there's also a big difference between explicit and implicit bias. So explicit bias is bias that you are aware of. Implicit bias is kind of bias that's unconsciously impacting you. And so getting a better awareness of maybe how implicit bias might show up for you with these issues, even if you think you're a strong ally to the community, can be really important. And then if you feel like with your bias that you're not able to be a supportive space for someone who is involved in sex work, someone who is trans, someone who's a trafficking survivor, refer someone to another provider rather than necessarily trying to take that on. Overall, there's not anything special that you need to do for trans sex workers. Just treat them as you would treat other patients. So self-educating. Some of the best ways to self-educate, one, are engaging with local sex workers and local sex workers' rights groups, as well as local trans rights groups. So wherever you're at in the world, just figuring out maybe where your local Pride Center is, where a local sex workers organization is, and then figuring out how you can get involved, learn from their resources, discuss sex work, and listen and read materials from sex workers about what sex workers need from their healthcare providers or in other aspects of the world. And then creating a safe space. So some things that can really help are just posting materials in a waiting room or office that show sex worker allyship, that can kind of hint to sex workers that this is a safe space for them, or hint to trans people that this is a safe space for them. Creating a safe environment for them, displaying posters or pamphlets in support of sex workers and trans individuals. A lot of the times those visual cues can be people's first introduction. Obviously, actions reflect louder than words. You have to still be creating a safe space and respecting these clients and working on your own bias, but finding different ways to signal that you're a safe space can help people kind of start to open up a little, or at least recognize that the space is safe for them too. Opening the discussion. So you want to ensure that patients will not be reported or judged for involvement in sex work. You want to verbally confirm that. Obviously, only verbally confirm it if it's true. Using direct, clear language, such as, have you ever supported yourself or supplemented your income through sex work? And this is something that could be discussed during someone's work or income or their sexual history, kind of whatever feels the most natural. And then mentioning that all information remains confidential. Opening the discussion to talk about trans experiences. So introducing yourself with your pronouns and asking your patients theirs, rather than trying to pick out if someone's trans or not and then asking them. It just makes more sense to just make a habit of introducing yourself, like, hi, my name is this and I use these pronouns. And then you ask people to introduce themselves, and they can kind of pick and choose if they want to disclose that information at that point, but it leaves it open to them, and it also signals that you're a safe space. And then asking the patient if a name that you have for them is their preferred name, or if they would like to be called something else. People can have preferred names that aren't necessarily trans, so this is just good practice to put in. And again, that all information remains confidential, so if someone's worried about being outed, whether to someone else in that practice or outside of the space, just kind of making sure that their confidentiality is respected. So sex workers and trans people aren't always going to disclose on the first meeting with someone. It takes a lot of building trusting relationships with people. Most of the people that I disclosed to signaled to me in many ways that they were safe, and it came up later. There are people where it came up a lot sooner than others, or in the first conversation, because of how that space was set up. But overall, you want to be focusing on building those relationships. So again, treat trans patients and sex workers as you would treat other patients. You want to have ongoing provider relationships that are long-term, where they know that they can talk about their lives freely and won't be judged, and where they know that they'll receive the support that they're looking for. That helps to build that kind of relationship so that they can feel supported, and if they choose to disclose, they can. They won't always disclose, even if they feel safe doing so, and they may choose not to disclose sex work or not to disclose it immediately. It really depends on how safe they feel disclosing their sex worker status or trans identity to medical professions and what reaction they're expecting. And that could also be informed based off of their experiences with past providers. So if someone's had a negative experience in healthcare, even if they feel safe in a space, they might still choose not to disclose that. So if someone does choose to disclose, that means that they trust you. You don't want to cut them off. You don't want to take it lightly. For a lot of people coming out, whether as trans, as a sex worker, as queer, that's a really huge deal. And so it's really important to kind of listen and validate their experience. You want to avoid making any assumptions about their work, such as risk factors that someone might have if you're hearing they're involved in sex work. You want to listen to why sex workers are accessing your services, because it might have nothing to do with their work. And same for trans people. The first time I came out as trans with this healthcare provider, the appointment changed from the thing that I came in to get healthcare for to whether or not I wanted gender affirming care, which, as a trans person, not all of my healthcare needs revolve around my trans identity, and nor do they revolve around my sexual health as a sex worker. There are plenty of other reasons for me to access healthcare. So when you're talking to sex workers about care, you'll want to discuss all forms of STI testing, not just HIV, discuss comprehensive health needs, not just sexual health, prioritize what the patient's most concerned about, and provide patient education throughout as it's relevant. LaResse, do you have something you want to say?
Yes, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We're almost there. Okay. And then you want to provide patients with the options for their care and meet patients where they're at. Really give them autonomy, so let them make informed decisions about their health. For many patients, sex work will continue to be their best or only option for, economic stability. So you don't want to force patients to exit work just to receive health care. As we could kind of see with Paulo's case, that can have a really detrimental impact on their health. Patients may not be ready or able to make dramatic changes surrounding their health immediately as well. And even if you don't support sex work, find ways to communicate that you support the sex worker themselves. Obviously, only if you really do, but just kind of trying to work around your biases and still support someone and understanding what they need best, even if it doesn't fit within your personal views. And then you want to listen to your patients rather than imposing labels on them. So with confidentiality, we either don't want to record the disclosure or we want to keep it on a personal note. and not a electronic record, because that's just not always as secure with confidentiality. So if a sex worker has different requests around their confidentiality, just respecting that. Be really transparent about mandated reporting. You want to ask them what they would and would not like on their record. Be aware of how your notes are distributed, and then don't share a patient's disclosure of being a sex worker or being trans to other members of a healthcare team unless you have explicit permission from that patient. So if someone is trying to exit, or if you are referring someone somewhere, you want to refer them to other supportive resources, whether that's a supportive organization or a job. You want to be aware of any biases of agencies that you're referring patients, and you also want to be careful not to out them as trans or a sex worker without their explicit permission. And try and select agencies that are educated about sex workers and trans individuals, and that won't turn patients away. Some things not to do: don't get police involved or make someone self-identify as a victim. That's really harmful. Sex workers and trans people already deal with an unbearable amount of stigma already, and patients might also have experienced violence from police and not be safe for them to report to those people. Don't promise something if you can't follow through. Always be upfront if you're not sure, and don't force someone out of economic stability. It's hard to understand if you've never had to do sex work, so just kind of recognize that for whatever reason they're involved in it, that might not be something that they can change. So there are lots of different resources. I listed some here. There are plenty of others out there. Coyote Re has lots of great resources. There's who's hosting the meeting. We have stuff like our Healing Hustler support group, which supports sex workers and trafficking survivors. And there's also a fair number of people in the group identify as trans. There's lots of intersectionality. It's really a safe space for lots of different marginalized people navigating the sex industry. And then we have plenty of other resources too. Their books really great that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. But I've highlighted some others here that you can kind of screenshot or take note. Overall, I want to thank Coyote for letting me use their existing healthcare modules and research to really help me create a presentation that was more inclusive of trans sex working experiences. But yeah, I think we have like 8 minutes. I don't know if I'm
Yes, the
putting that
panel. Thank you so much. You did a wonderful job, Yash. We're gonna ignore the excitement behind you. If you can stop sharing your screen so we can gather together as a little family in the gallery, I will unpin you. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and Yash will answer them. Again, I want to thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot. And just because you presented it to healthcare workers doesn't mean that we as a community don't need to know about how to address healthcare. There's a lot of tips, and there's a lot of I found out a lot of stuff. I'm just gonna say I'm not a sex worker. I'm a advocate for sex workers because they saved me when I was younger, when I got molested and raped. So I just have such a high regard for the business. I don't have the courage for the business because if I did, I'd probably be a billionaire right now. But I just want to say thank you again, and I just look forward to the panel to ask questions because I didn't know what some of those words were in your screen when you had like with the burlesque. And then you had something in there, and I was like, "What is that?" It's NB or something like that. And what does Faye mean?
NB is short for like non-binary. That's just one way that people write it out. And then Fae is just one of the pronouns I use. I identify my non-binary-esqueness with kind of Fae creature vibes. So
Oh, that's all right. You know, girl, I love dragons and vampires. Don't be ashamed. I got dressed up like a real queen. I mean, so Victorian, you don't even know. We probably should hang out, is what I'm saying, and go like, when they have those cosplayers stuff. Like I would be as a part of that. Yeah, girl. I get dressed up too. I just played the games they have outside in the field. but I just appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I want to praise Yash. The presentation was great, and we brought Yash to Rhode Island, and he presented in the 7th annual Trans Conference, and it was mostly people taking CME credits. The design is beautiful. The way you present it is just awesome. And I've always gotten very frustrated because I'm a white middle-aged woman that's straight, but the communities I'd be like, if you don't support sex workers, you don't support LGBT people because 67% of them were sex workers when we surveyed 1,500 people, and it gets frustrating because they're still indifferent to us, and they won their rights off our backs. It's Stonewall, but and I tell them this, even if you don't show up for us, we're gonna keep showing up for you. That's all we can do. But thank you, Yash. You were awesome. You rocked it.
Anyone else? Okay, so right now I'm gonna show a video. Oh, Zoey, do you have any questions? I just want to make sure because I don't want to miss anybody. Let me check to see if the audience have any questions. There's no questions posted. So we're gonna take a good 10-minute break and watch this video, and we will return back at 8:30. Wait, yeah, 8:37. We're gonna come back at 8:37. And that's a 10-minute break. We only went over a little bit. Don't worry about it. We're here for the stay. So I'll show the video, and everybody, if you want to get off your screen or whatever, it's your choice.
All right, today we're going to talk about something really important, a day of remembrance that was born from an incredible tragedy. It's the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. We're going to dive into where this day came from, why it's so desperately needed, and maybe what it asks of all of us. Let's get right into it. So what exactly is this day? Well, every single year on December 17th, sex workers, their friends, families, and allies all come together. It's a day that's specifically set aside for remembrance, a time to mourn the people who've been lost to violence, to honor their lives, and to demand that things change.
Okay, so where did this all begin? The roots of this day go back to 2003. It actually started as one single vigil in Seattle, organized by Dr. Annie Sprinkle and the Sex Workers Outreach Project USA. It was to honor the victims of the Green River Killer. But from that one powerful act of remembrance, it has just grown into this massive global movement. Now it's an international event that shines a bright light on hate crimes against sex workers all over the world.
So, what's the core purpose here? Well, before anything else, it's about remembering. It's a promise, really. A promise that no one will be forgotten and that no story will just be erased. Now this quote, wow, it really gets to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? It points to this deeply dehumanizing idea that a person's job can somehow be used to just dismiss their entire life. This perception that someone is other makes it so much easier for society to just look away when violence happens, and this day exists to confront that indifference head-on. And that's why this day has such clear goals that go way beyond just mourning. It's a real call to action. It's about putting a spotlight on hate crimes, about fighting to get rid of social stigma, and about exposing how certain laws and customs actually help create a climate where violence can thrive. It's an act of both remembrance and resistance, all rolled into one. And that brings us to what is maybe the most personal and just poignant part of this observance, honoring the names and the lives of those who have been lost. This quote is it's heartbreaking, because the scale of the loss is absolutely immense. And the tragic reality is that so many names will never, ever be known. Deaths often go uninvestigated, people might not be reported missing, or sometimes the stigma is so strong that families can't even acknowledge their loved one's work. And that reality, it makes the act of saying the names of those we do know even more vital. So, To fight back against this kind of erasure, Coyote Rye created something called the Master Memorial List back in 2020. This is a monumental effort. It's a historical archive that stretches all the way back to 1836. And get this, it's a living document. As cold cases get solved, like the case of Eklutna Annie, who was finally identified after 37 years, their names are added to the list. It's a powerful way of reclaiming history and reclaiming dignity. Now, the next few slides you'll see contain just a tiny fraction of the thousands of names on that list, but I'm going to read a few of them out loud. Helen Jewett, Fanny Hines, Annie Stone, Carrie Brown, Trixie Lee, Venus Extravaganza, Linda Malroy, name unknown, Lorraine Oviedo. Every single name represents a life, a full story. And the sheer volume, it's just impossible to read them all in the short time we have together. As these next names appear on the screen, I'm just going to be quiet for a moment. Let's take this time to honor them, and the thousands of others whose names we do know, and all the countless more whose names we don't.
Remembering is absolutely crucial, but so is understanding. So now let's explore some of the systemic roots of the violence that this day is trying to end.
The source material we looked at draws this incredibly powerful parallel with this line from a poem. The idea here is that the persecution happening today is just a continuation of a very long, very dark history of violence against people who challenge social norms, especially women and their autonomy.
And this really illustrates the point perfectly. This violence isn't random, it's systemic. It's fueled by this toxic mix of social stigma and laws that criminalize people's work. And it's all tangled up with racism, transphobia, xenophobia, and the criminalization of poverty and drug use. You can't pull these issues apart. They all intersect to create this climate of extreme danger.
But, and this is so important, in the face of all this danger, the community has not been passive. Far from it. So let's look at the proactive, life-saving solutions that have been built from the ground up. This slide shows a really stark contrast. On one side, you have billions of dollars spent on so-called awareness campaigns that, according to the sources, often just increase stigma without actually making anyone safer. And then on the other side, you see these incredible, practical, community-led solutions, things like a check-in culture or a proof-of-life text system. These are peer support networks designed by sex workers for sex workers to keep each other safe in real time.
So to close this out, we're going to turn to a poem by Norma Jean Almodovar. It captures the central question of this entire day. In a society that so often just looks away, who's going to bear witness?
Who will weep for us, the outcast whores, whom no one wants to know? The poem starts with this raw feeling of being an outcast, of being pushed so far to the margins that empathy just struggles to reach.
Who will speak for us, so our voice is heard above the blustering crowd? You in the night are comfort sought, but in the daylight spurned. And this one powerfully captures the hypocrisy that fuels so much of the stigma, that dangerous double standard between what happens in private and what's condemned in public.
And that's where the poem ends, and it's where we'll end too. It leaves us with a simple, direct question. It asks, who will care? Who will mourn? Who will speak up? It asks, will you?
It's too quiet. I'm going to read a little paragraph. It was my favorite quote from our book. It says, the sex worker rights movement is first and foremost a workers' movement. Lawmakers and police create our working conditions, so they're the bosses that we turn to negotiate for our labor and our safe work conditions. It was my favorite quote of the book. December has your hand up. Go ahead and talk, honey.
Sorry, I was just trying to showcase that I was here. Oh wait, no, I didn't know I could lower my hand. That's my bad. Let me just do that. Sorry about that. And we're back, folks. And we're getting ready for the next portion of our webinar. The Q&A is open for attendees only. The panelists and the host can ask the questions directly by raising your hands. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank everybody who is attending for attending, and those who will watch later. We appreciate your views and comments. I look forward to next December 17th, 2026. And if you would like to add anyone's name on to be included in the major list of recognition later on, we will have a poll and you will be able to, it's 7 questions, everybody. It's real easy and fast. And I believe the panelists can do it, but I know the host can't, but the attendees definitely can. So we want to thank everybody for participating. Next, we're going into our panel discussion. It's a moderated panel of trans sex workers. They will discuss their experiences of trans work and the ways their identities interact. And we will save 5 to 10 minutes after for Q&A. And please put your Q&A. There is a Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. If you click on it, you can ask questions. Let me introduce Bella will be the moderator and she will read the bios. And as she reads the bios, I'm just going to click on everybody who is part of the panel.
Okay.
And
What I was
post-
going to do is I'm going to do the bios of all three of them, and then I'm going to ask each person one question and then go back to the second question for each person, like that. So first we have Yash Riveria, who is Coyote's intersectional education and research director, trans sex worker, and sex trafficking survivor. He identifies as non-binary with a preference for masculine terms and a feminine gender expression. Yash has been involved in various types of sex work, including adult content, creation, escorting, and porn performing. He's also an advocate for both sex workers and LGBTQIA and rights. And then we have December. In December, a little bit of cosmic horror. You get it? An incredible social recluse born from the pits of Phoenix, Arizona. She's a mom and a monster, a myth, and sometimes a death. But 9 times out of 10, just a weirdo with a sonic obsession and a penchant for getting into more trouble than I'm worth. She's been doing sex work seriously since she was 18, but she was doing more for the longer than that, honestly. Above all else, she just values being able to talk, connect, and love on folks. That's beautiful. Thank you, December. And now we get Zoey. And Zoey is Coyote's gender and sexuality advisor. And she's a Caucasian trans disabled woman, and she's a proud transgender and sex worker rights advocate. So I'm going to ask Yash the first question. So, Yash, how has been being trans impacted your experiences as a sex worker?
So, I kind of mentioned this a little in my presentation, but I started realizing I was trans around the same time that I was starting to get into sex work. I was dating a girl back when I was 13 who did some hustling and kind of introducing me to it. And at the same time, I was starting to explore my gender identity a lot. And for the longest time, I wasn't out as trans in my work. I was very closeted. I remember even being afraid sometimes about clients finding out I was trans and that maybe introducing me to dangerous situations. But about like 2 or 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to be out as trans in my work. So at that point, I'd already been running my fan site for a little bit. I had some established fans. I had been escorting for a bit. And so it really was kind of a big shift for me to be like, hey guys, I'm trans and this is my new sex working name. These are my pronouns. I'd been out in my personal life, and it was really fascinating just kind of going through that shift and seeing how it impacted a lot of my clients. Mostly just didn't care. They're like, cool, whatever, moved on. Some people sometimes just get a little confused about it, and it's hard to explain sometimes, especially since a lot of clients show up assuming I'm a trans woman rather than a trans man, because that's what their exposure to trans people in sex work has been. And then I've also had the wonderful experience of getting to have clients who gender me correctly and who are involved in queer rights and who are really supportive. And that's been a really incredible experience to see people that are kind of allies in both worlds.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Zoey, what do you find is one of your biggest stumbling blocks in a romantic relationship as a transgender woman?
That's, let's see. I'd have to say that separating the quote unquote tranny chasers from the legitimate romantics is almost impossible. I'd like to say I know the way to sort them out in advance, but I don't, and it will suck. But you'll get over it. That's my answer.
Thank you. December, are you still there? You gotta unmute yourself, honey. Or did she step away for a minute? Hello? But we'll come back to her then. All right. Let's go back to Yash. And Yash, what was your journey like realizing you were trans?
So it took me a while to actually figure out what it was. I know I grew up feeling just different, but I also was kind of the weird foreign kid growing up. I was figuring out I was queer. I was neurodivergent, so I already didn't fit into spaces. And then I remember kind of it was like middle school, everyone's kind of refiguring out their identities, and gender roles are kind of coming in stronger, and there's all of these just kind of aspects of life that become very gendered. And I remember just relating a lot more with different masculine things. I remember wanting to be all these masculine characters that I was obsessed with in these shows I was watching, or all of my friends were guys, and there was always this big pressure to like present masculine, and I had a lot of like internalized homophobia and toxic masculinity I was navigating that I wouldn't have described as that then, but looking back, it was a lot of like the ways I was navigating my identity were very trying to communicate to me that I was trans. And I remember the first time I really started to verbalize it was I'd learned a little bit about trans people, and I remember relating a bit with it. And at one point telling a friend that I thought I was gay, and him arguing with me about how I was a lesbian because at that time I identified as a cisgender woman. And then just having this conversation about like, no, like I think I'm trans and I think I'm queer. And that was kind of the start to a whole new journey with it. And I was experimenting with my clothing and my expression and just kind of learning so many things about myself. And it took me a lot of years to really necessarily put a label on myself, but it's something that I've been exploring for a long time.
I love it that a man was mansplaining to you what your gender and sexuality should be. because because you couldn't figure it out without his input, right? Okay, this is going to be one of my favorite questions for December. What was your weirdest client personal as a trans person experience? And what would you do now, if anything, to change an outcome like that from happening again?
Oh dear. Okay. Who? Okay. So if I have to answer this one, oh man, I'm so sorry, children. I have to get graphic. Um,
Hey,
but so long story short, this was one of my first times doing anything back in the day. And it was a lot. It was an easier client because I didn't have to do anything actually spicy, apparently, on paper. Homie just wanted me to like come over and like cuddle and stuff, or so I thought. Um, Turned into a situation where I walk in the door, and mind you, he's a part of law enforcement, so I don't find that out until like I open the door. So now I'm freaking out. And this man just kind of like he wants to peel my socks off for me, and I'm wearing like thigh-high rainbow socks at this time. I was a lot less buff at the time. Um, I fit a couple of fantasies of his apparently, which also led to at one point him wanting me to like nurse off of him. And he was a very fuzzy man, so I felt like I was flossing on titty, and it wasn't the greatest. Um, but and then at the end of the entire thing, mind you, he's been like weird but sweet this entire time. And at the end, he's just all like, "Oh yeah, look, you want your money? Here, let me go get your money." And at the time, I'm just starting out, and I only asked for like 60, and this man decides to make it rain on me with 320s, and I'm like, "It was three fucking bills. Like, what are you?" um, yeah, very, very weird experience. I walked out of that one questioning my reality and determined to raise my prices. And so I did.
that
Is so hilarious.
was good. That was good. That was great. All right. Zoe, your next question is, in what way do you feel that sex workers are under or misrepresented in the media?
I think they're definitely misrep. Like for me, I'm a big video game fan. And I think they're definitely misrepresented in video games and electronic media. Hookers are usually dead or zombies. It's pretty much what you got. Or they're going to die, or you can make them die. It's sad and awful, but it is the reality.
They
And I
say our
think that
shelf
needs
life
to
is only
change.
7 years. That's what they claim. But I know several sex workers like me that have been in the business 30 or 40 years, but they say our shelf life is only 7 years. Okay, December, I get another one for you. And this is a good one too. What's your number one biggest lesson that you would pass on to another trans person starting to transition or a sex worker who's just starting out?
My answer to both is heavy duty research. Like, and I don't just mean like, oh, you're looking on online and then you're like, oh yeah, I kind of have a general idea. No, like get a piece of paper, write things down, and then as you're trying to work your way through like, okay, am I doing HRT or am I going to do in-person sex work or am I going to try to get some kind of surgery or anything like the more gender affirming stuff in terms of like surgery, or like am I going to go into like doing porn or anything? You want to figure out all of the stuff because to even enter in, you have to start out with a really, really good baseline trajectory of like, I have my paperwork, I know where I'm going for my care, I know where I'm going to get the supplies that I am going to need, be it either hormones or therapy or a support group. Like, you want to figure all of that information out. And there are way too many organizations, there are way too many places, and there are way too many means to protect yourself and stay informed to not put it in a notebook. Like, come on, we all watch Blue's Clues. Just throw it in, you're good, you're fine, we got it.
It was great. I'll have to send you the link. It was actually two trans sex workers that saved my ass. I married off to a 41-year-old man when I was 17, and this is back before we even had language, for transgender people. I'll send you the link. It was they were my saving grace. Okay, we're back to Yash, and Yash, we want you to tell us, what has your sex worker journey looked like?
So, again, I was kind of introduced to hustling a little bit by a middle school girlfriend. And we kind of started out doing a little more like street based work, which is kind of what my introduction to it was. I remember it being this like big thing we had to be quiet about, not because she had told me up front, she's like, hey, by the way, what we're doing is not legal. And I, being the naive child, I thought it was just because we were minors and I didn't have any awareness of sex workers' rights or legislation or issues, how to keep myself safe. And I ended up transitioning into more kind of online work that was kind of freelanced a little bit because I didn't have the access resources I have now, and also I shouldn't have access to those resources as a minor, at least some of them. And then I remember like being 16 and learning about the sex workers' rights movement and learning about these different like criminalization, legalization models, and all of these different things that were impacting sex workers, and just really suddenly wanting to get involved in sex workers' rights and learn as much as I could, because at that point, everything I understood came from my own experience, and it came from all the anti-sex work rhetoric that I've been like spoon-fed growing up. I also grew up in a very religious conservative background that also heavily impacted my views of sex work as well at the time. But then once I graduated high school, I remember COVID was happening and I got on some different fan sites. Some of my friends who knew what I was doing growing up, like as soon as OnlyFans became a big thing, were like messaging me like, why aren't you on this? And I was like, I literally can't right now. I'm a minor. I'm not going to. And I'd left the industry on and off because I did it sometimes for survival reasons, sometimes just because it was some extra money around. But it wasn't something I considered to be a big part of my life at that time. And then later on, now kind of exploring the world a little bit more, it is something that I've learned that I enjoy and that I want to do long term. So I got onto some fan sites, I got more into escorting, I learned about ad sites and how to screen and all of these different safety resources that were out there. I got involved with sex workers' rights groups like COYOTE and getting involved in different support groups, and that was really big for me. And then my next kind of big transition was like a year-ish ago, a little more than that actually. I started getting into professional porn work, which was a big step for me, and now I'm started to learn how to do things like professional cuddling, which is not sex work, but it is very adjacent because of the touch work and the ways that some of the same kind of stigma around touch in professional work spaces kind of tends to exist. So that's kind of been my journey so far. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Zoe, you there? Okay, here's your next question. Is it easier for you to tell people that you meet that you're a trans woman or sex worker, and why?
Um, that's a difficult question. I guess it depends on the person. If there's someone that's related to my healthcare, my physical healthcare, um, it's easier to tell them I'm transgender, but it's pretty obvious on most medical records that today they have the option for non-binary and what have you. So knowing and seeing my name as Zoe and seeing my medical record, they usually don't. Their first question is, "Oh, you're trans." I'm like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry." Um, I don't know. Telling people I've done sex work is not something I'm ashamed of. It's something that I feel is a layer on my personality. It would makes me who I am today. So there's nothing wrong with what I did. And it's not a moral compass thing or it was for me it was financial. Um I didn't particularly enjoy the occupation, but I didn't dislike it. It was just kind of work. Work is work. It's a way to get a paycheck.
Yeah.
And people weren't hiring in Maryland openly transgender people. So I spent several years paying the bills. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Okay, December. What has been the biggest positive impact on your life for transitioning?
Ooh. Um, hmm. Well, I would say personally, yeah, dang. Okay, again, I'm gonna have to explicit, but this is a different kind of explicit. It's sad. So, um, I grew up, obviously cishet dude, um, but with there being a certain cultural expectation, um, with me being the first and only born male heir to my family, I needed to be like there's a reason why even to this day, like that as pagan as I tend to be, I like still have a favorite biblical character being King David, and it's because that's who I related to. Um, Poet warrior, just that being the whole thing. When I came out as trans, one of the very, very, very first things that I did was I allowed myself to not want to be the warrior anymore. Because I didn't want to fight all of the time. And I was really sick of it. I was tired. It hurt. Everything about holding all of my wrath and consistent, constantly fumigating hatred. Like, it was the horrible levels of anger at everything. And then I was like, well, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to put on this really ratty wig that my mom had in her closet and this shitty cocktail dress, and I'm going to walk out the bathroom in heels. And that was me coming out to all of my friends at like a literal trap house. um, but like in it, I learned that like it was two really big lessons for me. First thing is that I don't know, your presentation of gender and expression does not have to be indicative of any kind of a particular role that you would play societally. It's not attached to any of that shit. Like, you can be whatever you are, however you want to be, which also, like, it feeds directly into the second thing that I learned, which was like, just because I identify with my feminine energy more doesn't mean I still can't crush a grown man's face with my biceps. You know, like I can still fight. I can still protect myself. I can still defend my people. But I can also be sweet. I can also be soft. I can be allowed to be emotional. I can cry. I can have a bad moment. I don't have to be a fucking brick wall all of the time. I am allowed to feel things. And so I decided by the end of it, like I was just going to like, yeah, I run by she, her, they, them pronouns typically, but that's in part because I like the sound of it more. It literally pleases my ears, but to me, gender means nothing. I am December, like that's it. So it's I don't know, the greatest thing that I took away from transitioning was just like I found myself in a way that I never would have been able to because I got to feel both extremes. So, yeah.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. So we're gonna go to Q&A and do a couple questions. LaResse, you want to take the Q&A?
Sure. So, one question that was given is, have you lost any family since you've come out? And the second one is the same, it's similar. It's like, is your family supportive? That's for any one of you guys, gals. Go ahead, Zoey.
In the first part, lost, I'm not sure what the context is. Is it referring to
Like
a
if your
death
family owned you.
or yeah, or a disowning thing?
Yeah, it's the
Um,
disowning.
I've had friends disown me, and but my family's been very supportive. I've been very grateful for that.
I can go next. I haven't had like a big disowning experience for being trans or being involved in sex work, but I've also done a lot more vetting with people in my life before disclosing that to them, usually, like at least people that mean a lot to me. Um, and some people in my life don't know, so I don't know if they would. But I know that like coming out as trans to my family, um, they're kind of wishy-washy about it. Sometimes they're supportive, sometimes they're definitely not supportive. Um, and it's usually less supportive and more just kind of a neutral thing that's there some of the time that I maybe would like to be valued more, but ends up not being a huge topic of discussion. But that's just kind of my experience so far with it.
Thank you. I have been disowned multiple times. I can imagine. That's because you a black male transitioning to a female, and our culture, and if you come from the gospel household, is extra. Christian Seventh Day Adventist specifically. Oh Lord Jesus! Yes. I have there are still family members that like do not talk to me, or like what was it, like there was a period of time where like I found the time to like try to reconnect because like I don't know, I'm a masochist, I guess. Like I feel like going back and double checking, being like, hey, you guys still hate me? Yeah, okay. um but there was a period of time where I even went back, tried to double check with a couple of cousins and stuff, and it was okay until they find out that I'm poly, or like that I do any kind of like sex work, or that I have events and stuff like that, and they're just like, nope, nah. So yeah, little bit. Yeah. I just love the way you respond to it with humor and joy, as if it could. So I have a slogan, pave your pain into power. And when you talk, when Zoe talk and Yash talk, I'm like, they've been paving their pain into power for a long time. And this is content and stories that I don't think I would be brave enough to ask or even find out what's going on, because it's so personal, you know. And when you're not in the lifestyle, it seems almost offensive. Like me asking what I would think I'm being offensive. So, oh, I'm not on there, so nobody can see my little avatar. And just so everybody will understand, the reason why we're using avatars is because we're showing um we're showing, that sometimes it's okay to be anonymous and you don't have to. And so if you want to know how to do an avatar, just come on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. and I'll teach you.
We thought about
But
this. If you hadn't been arrested or your family doesn't know, why would you put yourself out there, right? You know, I got arrested when I was 18. My whole family knew that got me out, But if I hadn't have been arrested or no one knew, I would be very careful about who I told. So it seems like the avatar and the way you can change your name on Zoom is a really good way that people can be anonymous if they want to, and still speak their truth. Because I wouldn't speak for a trans person because I'm not trans. I don't like it when people speak for sex workers and they're not a sex worker. So I understand that. Thanks.
so my next question is, are you in front in advocacy, or are you advocating, like being supportive behind doors, like on the outskirts? You don't want to be in the front. That's a weird. Maybe I need to rephrase that question. Are you an active advocate for sex workers' rights? And where can I participate in advocacy?
Yes, I can go. I would consider myself an active advocate in sex workers' rights. I mean, I've been doing a lot of active work with COYOTE. I, presented at this. I presented that research at a conference. I have tried to be pretty vocal about sex worker issues out and about. Currently, I've been kind of taking a step back a little from advocacy and activism with all of the crazy stuff happening. It just gets very overwhelming, especially when advocacy doesn't always lead to immediate progress. But I definitely am someone who's a little more out with my advocacy versus like I also know that there's lots of privilege that I have that makes it a lot easier for me to be out as a sex worker when I'm advocating than compared to other more marginalized sex workers.
Anyone else advocates? No?
Oh,
Oh, go
No.
ahead now.
oh,
December.
well,
And then Zoe after
so
December.
okay, bad. Well, I try to advocate as best as is humanly possible. This said, I have a criminal record and a tendency to throw hands when I shouldn't. So, um, I, yeah, how do I put it? I'm a very vocal advocate, not only amongst my circles, but if I'm ever being involved in a project, like I just did a research project with the YWCA like a year and some change ago. And I was constantly talking about it then and bringing to light like some of those aspects even while we were going through our marginalized groups. Because even though it was like directed at the QT BIPOC, again, just as Yash said, like 60 to 70% already actively doing stuff in sex work. And so it's like we kind of have to be aware of these things as a reality. But a lot of my advocacy shows up as if I'm outside and I see somebody and I get a hint of that, like they're a fellow SW. I get that energy and I'm just all like, okay, I'm just gonna make sure that you're good. And it's like, okay, you're meeting with your person, everything went cool. I didn't see any hint of danger or anything like that. Okay, I can put my Bowie knife back in my pocket. Like
Right.
so like yeah. A little bit more active in terms of like I try to keep my friends and my community safe, the people who are around me actively. Give them resources, point them in the best directions, give them information. But then the rest of it is like, I don't know. I'm in a cloak and dagger state, so I might as well use the cloak and dagger myself. Screw the Mormons.
Exactly. Zoey, what is your advocacy efforts?
Well, let's see. I'm happy to help anyone, you know, even if they're not transgender, in any way I can, with the exceptions of committing crimes, obviously, or conspiracy to commit a crime. But I find myself to be a very active activist. I started off with HIPS. If anyone knows them in DC, they it was an acronym a long time ago. It stood for Helping Individual Prostitutes Survive. But because they couldn't get funding, they dropped the acronym and just kept it HIPS. And now they're getting plenty of funding. Uh, but they're still their core mission is to help prostitutes and sex workers and homeless people. They have vending machines that have test kits and they do a lot of good stuff for DC.
Great.
But I think Rhode Island is more, Coyote does more for everyone instead of just Rhode Island.
Yes, Coyote is internationally known.
Yep. Thank you for letting me share.
No, you're welcome. I just think this panel was so informative and I learned a lot. I feel comfortable. I feel like I'm in a safe enough space. I hope you guys feel like we created a safe space for you. Um because it's important to know who's in the room and the content of the conversation to educate those who are ignorant from bias, stereotypes, prejudices, and ignorance, right? And as long as we can educate, we can minimize those biases, prejudices, stereotypes, and so forth. Bella, you
Yeah,
have any more questions?
I got a question. I think this is a good one. What is the stupidest question someone has asked you about being trans or your sexuality when they knew you were trans? This is gonna be good. I know I'm gonna get some good stories here.
Yeah, you see them looking like, wow, what was the stupidest question? Because, I get asked stupid questions. Like, there's 1,001. What's a good one? That's what everybody looks like.
Oh no, I have mine. This is just I was giving it a second. I was trying to wait because I was like, okay, I can go off for a moment if we um
Time to think.
okay, bet. Um I would have to say absolute dumb as a box of rocks thing that somebody has ever asked me in regards to me being trans and sexuality and all of that stuff, right? It was the simple question of like, but wait, so you still like you still like girls, right? And my brain was like, well, like yeah, like I didn't click as to why they were asking until I realized at the moment in time, like again, I was wearing one of my more cutesy outfits and everything. I got my skin tight stuff on. Again, I am thinner, so I'm not presenting as like I'm not yoked. I'm not doing any of the stuff. And I'm like, okay, let me just yes, I still like women. And she's like, but you are a woman. And I'm like, yes, I am a woman, but women can like women. She's like, but you used to be a boy. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. But sure, that's what I was assigned. And then she's all like, but don't you sleep with men at work? And I'm like, okay, I can't. Listen, lady, like, and it would have bothered me less if like it wasn't a situation where it was like directly after I had played with this person. Like, and so I'm like, obviously, yeah, I can like whatever I like. Like, I can go all of the directions. How I identify does not meet that, and it's like, Howard, you literally are a part of the proof here that I can like whoever I want to. Um, it was a really dumb thing, and I think the only part and the reason why it stands out to me so bad is because it was not the only time that she asked. And somewhere around like the fourth time, I was like, we cannot hook up anymore. I can't talk to you. This is not good for my blood pressure.
Sounds like she was hooked.
Most people are, I ain't gonna lie. I'm like,
All right, I can go. I don't have like a specific question, but I do get questions all the time about what genitals I have. Like, for some reason, not cis people who aren't trans allies who interact with me need to know what's in my pants, which you don't
Totally
really.
inappropriate, right?
Like, it's inappropriate. I've not, especially if it's like a first conversation with someone, it's like, I didn't ask you what's in your pants. Like, I didn't care. And that especially has come up more doing sex work because I advertise as a trans provider. And so I have clients that generally are curious because they might be interacting sexually with me. And then in that case, I can understand it more. But one thing that I've run into is a lot of the less visibility of trans men. A lot of trans men tend to either pass really well or just kind of be invisible in the communities and get kind of forgotten about when we talk about trans issues. And so a lot of times when people hear I'm trans, they think of trans woman. And so then I have to kind of explain a lot to them about like being trans mask and all of that. But I also, again, get all the genital questions, and it's not even always what genitals you have. Some days it's, are you circumcised? And I then get to inform them that I don't have a penis. So I unfortunately am neither. But yeah, that's been my main weird questions that I get related to being trans. So yeah.
That is a dumb question. Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Zoe.
Zoe.
Two things. My equipment is low on battery, so I gotta have to leave after this. But my dumbest question I get has to do with like, and it's similar to Yash, what's in your pants? But for me, it's the most common question I get is, are you functional? And that I see some people reacting. Um,
I don't
me,
know what
that's
that means. I'm ignorant. What do you mean, are you functioning?
functional. Me is the question: can you get an erection and can you ejaculate? It's actually a two-part question, but
Oh,
it's said
wow,
in
that's so
one
personal.
sentence. And for me, it's a difficult question because I've had partial lower genital surgery. I don't have a vagina, but I don't have male reproductive organs either. So I'm technically, if when people go, you know, are you trans? I'll be like, no, I'm a eunuch. And 90% of them have no idea what that means. Because I
Thank
don't
you for
have
your
female
bravery.
reproductive organs and I never will, but I've had my male reproductive organs surgically removed.
Okay.
So I'm partially functional. I can do what's necessary, but I don't have any messy cleanup.
Wow.
That's the
Like,
safest way to say what I am.
yes, but that's like sensational to my brain. It is. So that's the ignorance in me. My
What did you
apologies
call
if
it
I'm
again? Because
offensive.
I've never heard that term either, and it was interesting.
What do you call it? December?
He said he was she said he was she was I'm sorry, I'm not using the proper pronoun.
You're
They
good.
said
Sometimes
they were a eunuch, and
You,
I know what a eunuch is.
I
So I
didn't.
that's a perfect explanation of how to identify no organs.
Yeah, I just never heard the word before, so it was interesting that I'm always learning. Thank you.
It
Now,
originated in Chinese culture. Your word is translated to English. Um, but when in the Forbidden City, the only people that could come into the city were employees, basically, workers, slaves. They were fed and housed and clothed, and they did everything that was asked of them. But when they were children, the only way you could enter the Forbidden City is if you couldn't get any of the concubines pregnant. So you had to have visual confirmation that you no longer had testicles. And you had to be male because women had their own issues. And they quickly became concubines. Anyway, that's kind of where the eunuch started.
that's where I learned it from, China, watching the Asian dramas on YouTube.
I got it
Thank
from
you for your bravery, Zoe. That was a hard question, and you answered it bravely and honestly. And I'm in awe right now because that's tough. It's tough for me to listen. And so I know it had to be tough for you to say it. So I'm very grateful for your courage and your honesty. Like, seriously, dude. That's like so deep for me. I appreciate you all for your courage. I wish I
I
had
mean,
that
I
kind of.
stayed in my
I run around and
advocacy.
say I'm androgynous because I have dual brain functions and mannerisms. So I'm mostly a town boy, and but I don't identify with the LGBTQ community because in the 70s most girls was tomboys, you know. So um however, I just think the way this panel is, you guys blew my mind tonight, and I'm just so grateful to be a part, to be on your team, you know, to be a part of your community.
My thing's beeping. I gotta go.
Okay, Zoe.
You,
Um,
Zoe.
we're,
Appreciate you.
we'll see you next time.
Love you all.
Love you
Love
too.
you too.
Should we go into the memorial video?
Yes. We can go into the memorial. Anybody has anything else they want to say before we view the memorial? That Q&A was kind of tough.
It was good.
Yeah. Well, first, I got so distracted. Oh, it's up there. Okay. Let me mind my business.
First observed in 2003, the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers was founded by Dr. Annie Sprinkle and SWAP USA. The International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers is observed annually on December 17th by sex workers, their advocates, friends, families, and allies. Originally conceived as a memorial and vigil for the victims of the Green River Killer in Seattle, Washington, U.S., it has evolved into an annual international event. The day calls attention to hate crimes committed against sex workers worldwide, as well as the need to remove the social stigma and discrimination that have contributed to violence against sex workers and indifference from the communities they are a part of. Sex worker activists also state that custom and prohibitionist laws perpetuate such violence.
The majority of violence against sex workers is not just violence against sex workers. It's also violence against transgender people, people of color, women, drug users, undocumented people, disabled people, people experiencing homelessness, and poor women.
We cannot end the violence against sex workers without also fighting racism, specifically anti-blackness, transphobia, xenophobia, horophobia, stigma, and the criminalization of drug users. It's time to change the social perception that she wasn't a person, she was a prostitute. No one wants to feel a sense of community and sameness with her. She was something other than us, and therefore we don't need to feel fear or grief at the fact or matter of her death.
It's time to change this perception. It is time to remember and mourn those we have lost. It's time to continue fighting for the safety and rights of sex workers.
We're going to begin this memorial with a poem by Thea Forstrom titled Wild Woman Sisterhood. It was not witches who burned, it was women. Women who are seen as too beautiful, too outspoken, had too much water in the well. Yes, seriously. Who had a birthmark. Women who were too skilled with herbal medicine, too loud, too quiet, too much red in her hair. Women who had a strong nature connection. Women who danced, women who sung, or anything else really. Any woman was at risk of burning in the 1600s. Sisters testified and turned on each other when their babies were held under the ice. Children were tortured to confess their experiences with witches by being fake executed in ovens. Women were held underwater, and if they float, they were guilty and executed. If they sunk and drowned, they were innocent. Women were thrown off of cliffs. Women were put in deep holes in the ground. The start of this madness was years of famine, the war between religions, and lots of fear. The churches said that witches, demons, and the devil did exist, and women were nothing but trouble. As we see even today, there is often a scapegoat created, and the chaos escalated in Sweden when the Bible became law, and everything that did not line up with what the church said became lethal. The Bible fanaticism killed thousands of women. Everything connected to women became feared, especially her sexuality. It became labeled as dark and dangerous and was the core of the witch trials throughout the world. Why do I write this? Because I think the usage of words is important, especially when we are doing the work to pull these murky, repressed, and forgotten stories to the surface. Because knowing our history is important when we are building the new world, when we are doing the healing work of our lineages and as women. To give the women who have been slaughtered a voice, to give them redress and a chance of peace. It was not witches who burned. It was women. We'll now have 30 seconds of silence for the sex workers that we've lost.
So everybody just take a deep inhale and exhale. Bella, if somebody was triggered tonight because of the topic or the memorial video, what can they do?
They can call our hotline, which is me, at 401-525-8757. And another year we did the memorial list that went back to 1836. It's one thing when you do 1 year, and there's been some years where we had 57 people, 79 people we lost. But when you have over 1,000, it is not good for your mental health. It really isn't. And I know for me, the post-traumatic stress doesn't come from the clients. It comes from the hatred of society. To be hated when they don't know who we are or where we are, but they hate us because we exist. Oh, that's a lot to take in. So that's numbers 401-525-8757. And also, if they want to, if they're a sex worker, in December, there's an invitation for you too. They can join Healing Hustling on Tuesday nights and just get in touch with me, and I'll put them on the list, and they'll get a Zoom invite every week. And if they can make it some weeks and some not, you can come and go as you please. So there's no really rules, So, but I know I need it, and I'm really glad it exists.
So if you are a sex worker, a family member of a sex worker who has passed, a friend, an ally, and you want to add someone's name we didn't mention, you can scan the Q code, and I'm going to share my screen to have an individual be added to the major list. I think I got it in here. Maybe I need to shrink it to make sure you can actually see it. There it goes. And I hope you scanned it. And we're going to start the poll. Did it pop up? Okay. So if you want a cue card for the poll, I'll share my screen if you want to take it later. We will still get the answers. I got a lot of windows. Just put this up here. So you can use your camera phone to scan this QR code, and we will definitely get your responses. And I'm gonna save the poll so we can post it later while the video plays on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and the old Twitter is called X now. It's 7 questions. It's easy. Should take you less than 5 minutes to respond. Now, does the panelists or Bella have any closing remarks?
Yes, I do. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everyone for showing up for sex workers. I want to thank the organizing team, which was Yash, Zoey, LaResse and me, and Olivia and Coco. I want to thank the panelists, December, Yash, and Zoey. And thank LaResse for all the work she did to put this together, the webinar and all the graphics, and there's a lot of work. Um, and I want to thank everyone for showing up for sex workers.
My pleasure. Yash, we want to thank you for being the keynote speaker. Would like to invite you back. I think next year we should have a mixed panel, a non-sex worker, trans sex worker, and what is it? So I I want to know, and then again, forgive my ignorance. I want to know what's the fur babies, because I've been hearing a lot about. I don't, is that what they're called, fur babies? When you
Furbies.
dressed up
Furbies.
in what are they called?
The furries and the Therians.
Yeah.
My babies.
Everybody's got a kink. Different. There's always someone that's into something. You know. There's someone
Yeah,
for
I want to
everybody.
learn more about that.
You want one for Christmas?
Girl, if I live by myself. No. No, I seriously, I really do want to know because people have a misconception about it, and it's not always like some people put it with S&M, but S&M is something different. So like it'll be nice to have like someone who does S&M and someone who does furries on the piano next year. So it's not just about educating people, it's also about exposing people to what the industry offers in case you might get a new client. I don't know.
Yep, that's true.
But I want you guys to be safe. Always safety first, okay? I want to thank Coyote for always spending almost 70% of their budget on direct services and programming for sex workers. Um, if I'm not mistaken, was somewhere around 50% of the budget goes for direct services to sex workers, and 20% goes to almost 20% goes to our
Incarcerated women.
programs.
Well,
Yep,
we got three
for
programs.
formerly incarcerated
We,
women in our programs and
we got
incarcerated women.
we got Sister and Sister that you do. We got Healing Hustlings every week. We also have street outreach that Deborah does for us. We used to do it too. We also have a program with the women coming out of the jail. We don't have a prison in Rhode Island, so it's just one building. They never leave the building. And when they come out of jail, they would get $100 gift card for food and $100 gift card for clothes. Because when they go to the halfway house, it's getting like millions of dollars in funding. They don't have a clean bar of soap or pair of underwear the day they get there, and they're responsible for feeding themselves. And about a month ago, we had a woman that did 20 years. I remember I met down. I put $250 cash in her hand on top of the clothes and the gift cards. I was like, "Don't tell anyone I gave this to you." And next day, I went and bought her a bicycle and a helmet and a lock. And I was like, and a lot of them like freak out. They don't believe that we don't want something from them. And the only requirement is that you woman, you got out of jail within 30 days. But unfortunately, we're not getting funded next year because our funders are focusing on people that lost their federal funding. And we never had federal funding because the federal funding was going to the anti-trafficking people to oppress us. So we're going to keep doing as much as we can. We'll still have the support groups open. But you have to have money to buy gift cards and or street outreach people. We use an Amazon wish list, so people will buy stuff off the wish list. They'd rather buy a case of shampoo than give you $50. And I know there's all kinds of training programs to be a better fundraiser. But bitch, try to raise some money for the hose. It ain't that easy. No one wants to give money to the hose, okay? You know what I mean? So, I'm sure if it was any other subject, I could learn to do it, right? So it is what it is. But when I started this 15 years ago, when I came to Rhode Island, I worked under decrim. I didn't even know sex worker rights were a thing. Probably because I'd been in prison 3 years and 5 years. And I had a lot of catching up to do, figure out who Margot was. Margot was the creator of Coyote in the 70s, who Norma Jean was, find mentors, learn what was going on. And I was pissed off when they took it away 6 months later because it was a game changer. I wasn't doing anything illegal. Bitch, I could tell on you. No one tried to threaten you or play games with you. And then when the women started dying up on Gilgo Beach in New York, I was like, no, this isn't all right. Someone's going to do so. And what more can they do? They've already locked me up. My family knows, what more can they do other than murder me? I mean, what can the government do? And I'm here by myself, so I'm only committing misdemeanors with my cat, me and my cat. Um, and it's going to be, we talked about this in the Free Her campaign. The next generation of people that go to jail, of course, they're going to go to black neighborhoods and they're going to arrest these boys and men and they're going to give them 40, 50 years for trafficking instead of 5 or 10 years for dope. Um, and I think it's Arizona right now suing because the prisons aren't full enough. And when they built them, they were supposed to keep them 85% full so they get money. And they're suing them because there's not enough inmates in them. It's fucked up.
Yeah, that's why they're coming out with new laws like criminalizing homelessness as if
Exactly. Exactly.
and things like that. So again, we want to thank everybody for attending our 22nd international anniversary of International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers, a day of reflection, advocacy, and remembrance for sex workers around the world who have lost their lives to violence or face systemic injustice. If there is nothing else from the audience or the panel, I would like to give you back 15 minutes of your life.